everyone. Thank you. We're all ready to get started. As I call the meeting to order, I just want to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territories of the Coast and the Strait Salish peoples, specifically the Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and that their historic connections to these lands and these waters continues to this day. I also just want to let people know, if you're wondering, if you look a little short up here, we have 3 of our members of council that are attending remotely. They've all had health exposures, potentially COVID, that they want to make sure that they're keeping the rest of us safe. So I appreciate them being here virtually to participate in this meeting. So up first, we have approval of the agenda for the May 9th meeting. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Don't see any. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Before I continue, I am missing Councillor Zelka from the Zoom meeting. So I'm just going to wait a moment here and see if we can get him back online. No. Is there, does someone text him already?
Your Worship, he should be in within the next couple of moments electronically.
So with the indulgence of, actually, yeah, indulgence of council, we'll just wait. We just have some minutes, but if there's any changes or corrections he wants to see done, we should deal with them at the real time, not have to go back. Thank you for your patience, everyone. For those who don't know as well, if you hear a new voice in the background, you will hear Mr. Coates, who is sitting in as our Acting Director of Corporate Services. As you know, we recently promoted Ms. Williams from our Director of Corporate Services to CAO, so Mr. Coates is filling in for us for the time being and doing a very able job of it as well. So welcome to the meeting, Mr. Coates. And there's Councillor Zelka, who has now joined us. Welcome, Councillor Zelka. We're just on the second item of the agenda, the approval of the adoption of the third adoption of the minutes from doing the regular council meeting of April 25th. There's a 5:15 and a 6 o'clock to approve. Can I get a move and a second?
Move adoption.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion, changes, or corrections for those minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. We now move on to the receipt of committee minutes and public hearing reports. There's 3 here. We can receive them all at the same time.
Move to receive.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. That carries. Mayor's remarks are brief this evening. Sorry? Oh, I may be working off an older agenda. Hold on a second. Let me pop up my apologies. Always the danger of getting prepared ahead of time. Oh, and sorry, you're right. There's a revising report here as well from the previous meeting. So we have from the closed meeting of April 25th and March 31st. I just need a motion to rise and report on those 2 items. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Thank you. Now I get to go do my mayor's remarks, which are still mercifully short. For those on council and those at home, our tax notices are being mailed out. It's good news for our coffers. Probably not so well received by the people receiving them. I just want to highlight John Hillman, who is doing his 103 laps for $103,000. That's still ongoing and just doing a remarkable job of on his 103rd birthday of raising funds for the Save the Children, and that's all going to children in Ukraine this year. I also just want to acknowledge the Monterey's Volunteer Appreciation Event. Councillors Zelka and Patterson were able to attend. Others were unable to, but all wanted to be there. And it was really a nice area just to, again, thank all the many volunteers who make that Monterey Center such a success, running all the different programs. Also, just want to let people know the infill housing piece is scheduled to come back on May 24th to council. So that'll be the chance we have to see some of the results from the public input that's happened so far and to give some next steps. So I know that's an area of general public interest. So I was asking today about the timeline, and so I thought since I was interested, everyone else was probably a bit interested as well. So moving on to item number 7, this is an opportunity for public input. We don't have anybody registered, but if anybody wishes to address council on items or areas of interest related to to Oak Bay in general, you may, at this time, if you're on the Zoom call, raise your hand. This is not, if it's an agenda item later in the agenda, we will take the input at that time, but this is just for more general input. If you're calling in, watching on the live stream, you can call the 1-855 number, hit the meeting ID, the passcode, and hit *9 to raise your hand, and you will show up in our meeting here. Normally, people do tend to register ahead of time so that we know that you're coming, but I'll give it a moment here to see if anybody raises their hand, and if not, I'll probably do is move forward, and if I see a hand raised from the public coming in, I can always come back to the public input portion. Just turning to staff, I don't see any indication people wish to address, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda and keep an eye on that. So then number 8 on the agenda, we are just going to move forward with reports and memorandums. These next couple of items are not subject to public input. So first off, it's just Windsor Road sewer replacement. Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe the Director of Engineering and Public Works is prepared to present that report.
So he is, and my apologies. Mr. Rennick, I believe you're joining us online.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. How's my volume?
It's audible. You could speak a little louder. It would be helpful.
Okay, sorry. I'll try and speak a little bit louder. So I am presenting tonight the results of the request for tenders that the engineering department concluded for phase 2 of the Windsor Road sanitary sewer project. In accordance with the district's sustainable purchasing policy, contracts that have a value in excess of $250,000 must come to council so that they can be awarded. The district ran an open tender process through BC Bid and received submissions from 3 different firms. All 3 submissions were compliant, and staff is recommending that it be awarded to Ralmax Contracting Limited, which was the lowest tender price of the 3. And I would just like to note that while there is budget in this capital program for this particular project, the tender price does exceed what we had allocated to this particular project. We did an analysis and we think that the tender price is still reasonable. There was escalation in material costs that, we hadn't factored in at the time that we came up with the estimates. So there's no ask for additional transfer from reserve at this time, but it is possible that later this year, as other projects come closer to the start of construction, that we may have to have another look at the program budget. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rennick. Are there any questions of Mr. Rennick at this time? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and to you, through you to Mr. Rennick. Thank you very much for this report, Mr. Rennick. I do support your recommendation. A couple of questions. So the lead-in paragraph about it references the underground infrastructure not having sufficient capacity to handle future population growth and climate change projections. And although that is somewhat separate from the issue before us tonight, I would like to hopefully capture that thought and then transfer it to some of the same question has come up with regard to infill housing and just things we do. So again, these reports bring it in, but then you need to somehow capture it and take it into the other reports. And Mr. Rennick doesn't always join us for those reports because he's in a different section. So if I could just capture that. And the question I had that does pertain to this is for 313 meters of pipe. Do we know how that relates to proportionate to the total system?
Mr. Rennick?
Thank you, Your Worship. To address the comment about the pipe capacity, the district has a sanitary sewer master plan that was completed earlier this year, and that looks at not only the current land use, but also a future land use and future climate change scenario. So it is entirely possible that we could have pipes that are adequately sized for current conditions, but are still flagged as needing to be replaced in accordance with future land use or future climate change. So that's all that we were trying to get at with that lead in. In terms of the second question that Councillor Patterson asked, 313 meters, our overall network is approximately 120 kilometers. So it's a fraction of 1%. It's less than 0.5%.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no further questions, and I'm happy to support the recommendation of staff when we're ready.
We took that as a motion and it was seconded,
Yeah.
so it's live on the floor, the staff recommendation. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Can you hear me okay?
And
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. I see that this is really only for, as Councillor Patterson indicated, it's only for part of the project from Hampshire through to St. Patrick. Just out of curiosity, why is it being split into two and we just don't go all the way through to Windsor Park, since that's going to be quite a bit of construction through there, and I imagine the road will be shut down for a period of time. Just these are some assumptions that maybe the staff could also confirm at the same time.
thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Rennick?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the council. This is actually the second phase. The first phase of this project was completed in the fall of last year. And the reason that we chose to break it into two phases was just that had we done the entire project all at once, it would have been the entire sanitary sewer renewal budget for the year. And so we wanted to break it into phases so that we could do projects in multiple locations. And it also would have been a longer project and a bigger disruption to a major bus route. Beg your pardon. And so basically as an operational decision, we decided it made more sense to split it into two phases.
Excellent. Follow up, if I may.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
I understand that the CRD is also doing some sort of rather major water pipe replacement with a bit of an east-west access north of here very shortly. Is this going to be causing traffic tie-ups, or does staff anticipate any concerns or any interactions between this project and whatever the timing is on that other project?
Mr. Rennick, are you familiar with the project Councillor Zelka is referring to?
Through you, Mayor, I believe, Councillor Zelka, you might be referring to the relining of the Bowker Trunk sewer, which is a sewer project and not a water project. And so that project is primarily using what we call trenchless technology, where they would have to set up over top of a manhole. Wouldn't require them to open the road up the way that you would do for a conventional sewer replacement. So we do anticipate that will have some impacts on traffic in Oak Bay, but it's a lot less invasive than cutting open the road. Also, the majority of that section of the pipe is not in the road. It's running through Firefighters Park or through rear yard easements, for example.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Are there any other questions or comments on the motion in front of us? I don't see any hands popping up, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Rennick. Now, Mr. Payne, I believe I will go to you for the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan submission.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The application period is open for the UBCM Excellence Awards. We believe that the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan would be a good candidate for one of the streams there. And the application requires a council resolution supporting that application, and that's why this is before you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Is there any questions of Mr. Payne on this item? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I really have no questions, but I just wondered if you would like a motion to move forward.
I'll always take a motion if you want to make one. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I would support the recommendation of Mr. Payne, please.
Thank you. It's moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion on this item? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I, like my colleagues, do support this motion. I struggled with it, I must admit at first, although I recognize certainly all of the effort that went into the report, but I have been asking for another piece to go with that, and that is really not the asset management, but managing the assets. So I'm still, and Mr. Payne is smiling, but I still am waiting for that portion. However, I did actually go in and take a look at what the requirements are for applying for this award, and having looked at what the category recognizes as the requirements and for outstanding performance in this, I feel that I can support it going forward, and still hopefully looking for the other piece to go with this. So I am happy to support this too.
Councillor Patterson. Any other discussion? I'll just throw a quick comment on this one. I want to express my appreciation. This is just another step, and I think it's important for us as a council and for the community to recognize how far we've come on this road towards effective asset management. I know our Director of Engineering and Mr. Payne our Director of Finance have been, out and speaking to other municipalities around the province, and have been invited to talk on a number of areas as subject matter experts on this. And while it's never a final destination, I think the work that's been done by this council and by the staff to implement has been quite phenomenal. Changed our whole alignment of where we sit on the spectrum of being close to a full asset management model. And so very excited to see this go forward for submission. I'm sure there's a very good chance that we'll be successful as well, just given all the work that's been done. So thank you to staff for all that's been done to date to get us in this position. I don't see any other hands up, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Submission going forward. Thank you, Mr. Payne. Back to the next item on the agenda. The next item, which is the financial services findings report. We have KPMG here with us as well. Just for the record, this is a portion of the agenda that is open to public input. So if there's people who are watching who wish to have questions or comments, you're more than welcome to do so. Again, you call the 1-855 number. Excuse me. That's on the screen right now, and hit *9 to raise your hand. After we go through the presentation, we'll take follow-up comments from Mr. Payne, and then we'll take questions of council, and then go to the public, and then come back to this table for direction. So with that, we have here from KPMG, and my apologies, I have the name in front of me, Ms. Bates-Emer, is that correct? From KPMG to do an overview of the findings. And so I think I'll just do a direct introduction unless you wish to make the introduction, Mr. Payne. Okay. Ms. Bates-Emer, welcome to our meeting.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. For those of you that haven't met me before, I am the Audit Engagement Partner, Liette. The Audit Engagement Senior Manager this year was Julie Robinson again, who's been on the file for maybe 3 years now. So both of us have been involved for a few years. I'll just speak to the highlights of our findings rather than kind of going through the report page by page. Firstly, mention the status of our audit. So we performed our field work several weeks ago now. We were provided all the information that we needed to do our work by management. From my perspective, it was a smooth audit. And at this stage, we're complete, pending the approval of council or acceptance of the financial statements and signing of the management rep letter. You will see from the draft financial statements that our anticipated audit opinion is again a clean opinion or an unqualified audit opinion that the financial statements present fairly in accordance with public sector accounting standards. When we provide our opinion, it is that the financial statements are not materially misstated. So at this stage of the audit, I do usually mention to you what is the materiality we did use in our audit. So for the current year, we used a materiality of $1 million, which is based on a gross benchmark of total expenses, and we're at about 2.3% of total expenses. The prior year's materiality was $900,000, which again was about 2.3% of total expenses. So the auditing standards allow us to be anywhere from 0.5 to 3%. So we're at the mid to higher end of the range. That being said, we do report any differences that we find throughout our work that are greater than 45,000 at this level, at this meeting. The materiality figure is to represent the level of error that would change a user's decision when looking at your financial statements. So we're using expenses. You know, you could potentially have a bigger error on your balance sheet or against your assets that would be maybe more acceptable, but because we're looking using the expenses, we have the figure of $1 million. In terms of risks in this audit, there really is only one risk identified in our risk assessment in this audit, and that's required by professional standards. If you remember my presentation from the past, I do always remind you that this risk does exist and that we have addressed it, and it is the risk of fraud due to management override of internal controls. We address this risk with our procedures that we perform around journal entries, mainly manual journal entries, where you could you know, manipulate things to look a certain way, typically at the year end. We also look at any estimates used in the preparation of the financial statements. So estimates we can't audit to a precision, and our areas of the financial statement preparation where there is a little bit of flexibility and gray areas. So, you know, you don't really have any significant estimates used in the preparation of your financial statements. You do have to guess at your estimated useful life of your tangible capital assets, which, you know, you guys have done that in line with others in your sector and in the public sector in general, so not really an issue. You do have some employee future benefit liabilities recorded here that are not that significant either in terms of our materiality. In terms of the results of the audit, you'll see there's really only one significant topic that we mentioned, which was the revenue recognition of the deferred gas tax, which had been sitting in your balance sheet as liabilities for several years. And the council made a motion in the current year to disencumber those funds, bring them in, and then use different monies for the same project going forward. So we reviewed the approvals of that and have accepted the accounting treatment, whereby bringing that into revenue in the current year, and then the movement around within your reserves is acceptable in accordance with PSAB. You'll see that we did not identify any audit adjustments that were corrected in the financial statements. There was one entry that we identified, which is uncorrected. However, it is actually a correction that occurred in the current year that should have occurred in the prior year. So at the end of 2021, everything is correct. It's just that it was in the wrong year. And it was a pretty small amount, $328,000. And then we just have one further sort of difference in disclosures and another item that management did identify and correct, which was appropriately treating the sewer connection fees as gross revenues and expenses rather than netting them. So that's been corrected, and you know, technically, if you correct anything in your comparative figures there, it should be labeled as restated. You know, however, that was immaterial, so we can live with the fact that the column was not labeled as restated. I can report that we did not identify any significant deficiencies in internal controls, nor did we really identify any other deficiencies that we determined during the current year's audit. There was one item that's been a carry forward for a couple of years related to the accounting for developer contributed assets. And management is in the process of sort of implementing a new policy to appropriately capture once a developer contributed asset is completed and have it entered into your records here as revenue and as capital assets. So that was still sort of in process. That's why it remains in our management letter. But we understand that that is going to be implemented in the upcoming year. Last couple things, I'll just confirm our independence as your auditors is something that we need to do at this stage. The report that we've provided does have, in the appendix there, a description of upcoming public sector accounting standard changes. So the next change that will occur is the new standard around asset retirement obligations, which will need to be reflected in the district's 2023 financial statement. So not the upcoming year, but the year after that. And will be a bit of a project which management has already started to undertake. Lastly, just want to thank Chris and Kathy and the team for all of their help with the audit for us. Like I said at the beginning, it did go very smoothly, and I thank them for all their work with us.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bates-Emer. Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship. I figured that the order of the presentations would go such that I would present my comments on the financial statements rather than pausing now for questions, as some of the questions you may ask may be covered in my presentation. So that's what we do here. As mentioned, the auditor's role here in the presentation provided by KPMG, it does serve a different role than what my presentation and the purpose of my presentation. Ms. Bates-Emer's presentation really is to let council know whether or not, in their opinion, the financial statements present fairly. And as mentioned, they're prepared to issue a clean audit opinion. My role here is really to describe to council what I think the impact of the financial operations are and whether or not staff perform within the financial expenditure controls established by council during the year. So before I begin, I just wanted to introduce formally Kathy McLennan, our Deputy Director of Financial Services. Many of you have met her informally. This would be her first attendance at a council meeting. Ms. McLennan ran the audit this year, led the audit, prepared the financial statements draft for my review, and essentially she ran the financial operations since April of last year. So they were really largely a product of her elbow grease. So I thank her for that this year. I had a little bit more time during Christmas break this year, thanks to Kathy. So as mentioned, the financial statements, they're prepared in accordance with public sector accounting standards, and they're presented to council before May 15th for approval pursuant to the community charter. They have to be audited, and those audit results have to be presented to council as well. So I would say that financial statements are a tool. They're a good tool for analysis, but also to judge management on whether spending was within the financial plan bylaw limits that council set and whether or not the services that were envisioned in that financial plan bylaw were actually delivered. So I'm happy to report that the district spent within its financial plan bylaw limits, so there is no overspending whatsoever. In fact, the district produced a $2.7 million budgetary surplus. And I do say budgetary surplus, it is different than an accounting surplus. You'll see on the financial statement there's an accounting surplus there, but that includes, an accounting surplus doesn't include things like capital expenditures and debt payments as well. So a budgetary surplus does include those things, as those are set by council. You do set limits for spending on capital expenditures and debt as well. So essentially this means that there was $2.7 million excess in surplus for council to use for future financial plans to fund various things, and that's really the purpose of the next report on the agenda, which is the allocation of that surplus. Most of the surplus was due to greater revenues earned at the Parks, Rec and Culture Department, over $1.3 million there. They also underspent by $300,000, which is actually a small variance for the size of their budget. But in terms of the revenues, that was certainly very positive. There's also underspending in the police department. There was additional investment revenue, additional building and planning revenue, some underspending in public works, and various underspending elsewhere, and that's what accumulated that $2.7 million. I just wanted to mention as well, per our investment policy that was adopted in 2020, I'm required to report to you the contents of our investment portfolio, and those contents are noted in the note 2 of the financial statement. So you can see there very clearly where our funds are being, where our portfolio proportions are, and whether or not they're in compliance with our investment policy. And yes, I can say they are in compliance with our investment policy. I also just wanted to mention, and it's not, the purpose of this isn't just a pat on the back, but just to demonstrate the impact of council governance. You will recall that in 2020, council adopted a new investment policy. Also, you repealed a number of reserve bylaws and consolidated those reserve bylaws. And that policy and the new reserve bylaw allowed the district to really diversify its portfolio. We're projecting this year investment returns of over $1.4 million. And when you consider how restricted our investment portfolio was back in 2019, we're expecting an incremental increase in investment returns of over $2.5 million over that term. And the reason it's important to highlight that is just because the majority of those funds and investment returns will be used to fund infrastructure replacement, as they are retained in the reserves that earn the interest. So it's additional funding, tax-free funding that the district can use to fund infrastructure replacement. This year for capital expenditures was another record year, $6.8 million versus $5.9 million. Certainly shy of the goals that council has set for infrastructure replacement and other capital expenditures, but nevertheless moving in the right direction. As mentioned by Mrs. Emer, pardon me. The auditors identified one corrected misstatement, and that was essentially that our employee future benefits obligation was overstated in last year's financial statements. So we corrected that. We identified that this year as part of the payroll project. That project really brought the ability for us to reconcile our accounts to a very certain level. And so that was identified by the Deputy Director of Financial Services and corrected promptly. It is a mistake that happens to correct in our favor, so it's additional funding for us because we had overstated a liability. And then lastly, to comment on the developer contributed assets internal controls, it has been something that the district has been improving over the last couple of years. Council will recall in 2020, we identified over $1 million in developer contributed assets that hadn't been added to the balance sheet, and that was basically due to a lack of internal controls and internal process between us and the engineering department. So that internal communication certainly has been improved, and we've developed what we call a statement of valuation, which now has to be signed by the developer's engineer upon the district receiving the assets. So that process was in place for the year end, but the actual form and the sign-off requirement by the professional engineer wasn't in place. Council can expect this year some amendments to the subdivision and servicing bylaw that would require that sign-off by the professional engineer. So again, that will strengthen the internal control. So I expect that to be not an identified internal control risk in next year's audit. So thank you, Your Worship, and either myself or the partner with KPMG is available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. Again, I'm just going to make the invitation. If any members of the public do wish to comment or have questions, you're more than welcome to do so. If you're online, you can just hit *9, call into the 1-855 number and hit *9. Or if you're in the Zoom app, you can raise your hand within the app. Or if you're in the room, you can raise your hand and I'll get to you as well. So with that, are there questions from members of council? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff, I congratulate you on a clean audit. That's always a very nice feeling to have a clean audit. And I know there's a lot of work that goes into it, so I just wanted to thank you for that. I have just a couple of minor questions. that aren't covered in all the big numbers we go through. But I noticed the actuarial adjustment for the employee future benefit obligations, the discounting rate has changed. I'm just wondering how often that is revisited and maybe when that occurred.
Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Patterson. It's reviewed every single year. We contract with Mercer to do our actuarial, and they base their discount on a number of factors. And I actually expect significant change in that discount rate next year, given the significant change in the bond market and other factors that impact that. Inflation is also another factor. So yeah, it's reviewed every year through that evaluation.
Go ahead.
Great. And the second question, I probably know the answer, but have forgotten it to this. But for the investments we do we get more than one opinion on the investments we make?
Go ahead, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, when we go out for investment, we take multiple bids. In fact, this is the first year where we've participated in a bid platform. Not that you're asking specifically about the software, but it's a bid platform and it's quite broad. You will notice that the majority of our funds are with the Municipal Finance Authority. The proportion therein is a judgment call by myself based on what I believe our short-term and long-term cash flow needs are.
Thank you. You're good, Councillor Patterson? Thank you. Any other questions of Mr. Payne or Ms. Bates-Emer, sorry. Should remember that by now. I don't see. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. I have just a curiosity question and then a comment. My curiosity question, I think, goes to Ms. Bates-Emer, and that is in regards to materiality and the percentage of benchmark. How does that, is that about a normal amount and percentage in comparison to other same-sized municipalities?
Ms. Bates-Emer?
Yes, thank you. I would say probably yes. You know, we might be anywhere from 1.5 would be pretty low. I would typically see the municipalities around 2%. You know, looking at your asset, looking at the materiality against your assets, it even when it's 2.3% of expenses, it seems kind of low if you're looking at your assets. And you remember a couple of years ago when we had the big missing $1 million worth of developer contributed assets, you know, it was in talking with Chris, you know, was that really material? $1 million on 70 million? You know, maybe not. So, yeah, I think you're within the range of, you know, what we would typically see on our other audits of municipalities.
Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you very much. And then my only other comment would be the one thing that did jump out to me was how much better our investment income had done than what we had thought. So kudos to Mr. Payne for managing that so well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you to staff and the auditors for excellent work done. Welcome to Ms. McLennan, and congratulations to you, Mr. Payne, for a clean audit. A couple of questions. Some of them are from curiosity. Those COVID funds that we were granted at the beginning of the COVID process. Now that COVID is coming to an end, I'm just curious, what happened to the COVID funds? I didn't really see anything jumping out in the audit here or in the financial statements. And maybe related, is this having something to do with the Parks, Rec and Culture doing so well in terms of returning so much revenue?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Councillor Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. The remaining COVID-19 Restart Grant funds, you could find them in note 7 of the financial statements if you're ever curious enough to look there. We were given approximately $3.6 million. We're down to about $6 million. We had budgeted to use over $2 million. I believe it was $2.5 million to support revenues at the Parks Rec and Culture Department. And you're exactly right. The Parks Rec and Culture Department performed better than expected, and so we used less of those funds at the end of the year. Anticipating that your next question may be, well, what happens to those funds if we don't need them? There is a mechanism by which we can retroactively apply those funds to eligible expenses. So we can look at that. And the use of those funds is significantly broad. So we could look at new uses for those funds. And there has been no indication from the ministry that there will be a clawback of those funds whatsoever. So I'm not concerned that we won't be able to find use for those funds.
Thank you.
Excellent. If I may continue, Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Yeah, very much appreciate also you explaining the difference between the budgetary surplus versus an accounting surplus. And it sounds like, again, Parks and Rec Culture is doing very well on the budgetary side. So touching a bit on long-term loans, I see our long-term debt is going down. Is that related to the Parks Rec and Culture loan to build the B Street facility so many decades ago, and that hopefully will be discharged soon?
Mr. Payne, I think it's renovation.
Note number 5.
Note number 5. Okay, Mr. Payne?
Through your worship, yes, that's correct.
When do we expect the loan to be discharged?
Payne?
Your worship, I believe 2023 is the last year that loan will have any outstanding balance. It'll expire by the end of 2023.
And there's
Excellent.
nods from all the financial people in the room supporting that. So just so you know.
Fantastic. Okay, and then vaguely related, I'll echo the comments of my other colleagues. Well done on the investments and just performance overall. So question then, I recall, and this is more for staff, maybe the corporate services. I recall that there was a notice of motion to set up a finance committee or an audit committee or some sort of an audit management committee. I related to, and that's a sort of committee that would often help with this sort of auditing process. I just was wondering, what's the status of that and where are we at, please?
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Zelka. It is definitely a question for the. Now, is that Ms. Morden or Mr. Payne? Do you? Okay, Mr. Payne is ready to answer. I'll let him go.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll answer from my recollection, and I'm sure Councillor Patterson will correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that Councillor Patterson had put forward a notice of motion, but withdrew it out of recognition of the time of year. And so, to my knowledge, there is no notice of motion. There was a report prepared by Corporate Services that related to a number of different committees, the costs of it, and there was information in that report about the potential cost and function and terms of reference that could be used for a finance committee. So that hasn't been actioned since that report has been before council.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, the update and reminding me where we are in that process, just so that my expectations are managed well. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I do look forward to finding ways to support the finance team on this excellent work going forward. Thank you again.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the council?
If there's no members of the public, I'll make the motion to receive and to approve.
Before it's seconded, okay. We'll take a mover and a seconder, that's fine. So that's the motion to receive?
Receive and approve the 2021 financial
Okay,
statement.
we'll do them together. So moved and seconded. I don't see any hands up on my screen here at all. Just looking to staff. There's no indications that members of the public have indicated they wish to speak. Okay, thank you. So moved and seconded. It's live. Is there any further discussion on these? I had one. Oh, go ahead. Oh, I have just one question, and I'm always sort of curious seeing swings. So I noticed under the financial liabilities, the accounts payable and accrued liabilities dropped year over year, and sometimes those are just timing, and sometimes they're indicative of changes of practice where we're collecting faster or something. So just curious if that improvement there of having smaller accounts payable outstanding is a change of practice, or if it's just happens to be this year is different than last year. Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, I would say it is a one-time difference. $9 million of that was a school tax payment, which is normally due throughout the year and before year end, but they allowed us to defer it, and we decided to earn interest revenue off of that money.
That's a great answer. Thank you for that. It's just such a significant difference. I see Councillor Zelke, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I have just one more question, if I may, please. Notice in Appendix A, other control aspects relating to developer contributed assets. If one of us or maybe the public had a question about, I don't know, something that we know a developer contributed to, as an example, the Bowker-Cadbro Bay intersection, I believe, had a contribution from a local developer. I understand that this Appendix A is making sure that it's, of course, properly recorded on the books, but in terms of the performance of the dollars or the performance of the project, or because quite often we sort of approve the project up front, but when at the end of the project, once it's all sort of put together, things are rolled up, and it's kind of hard to tell, like, how well did we do on those various projects? And for example, is there any way of determining the analysis, what percentage, for example, that some of the developers paid with respect to the total cost of some of these projects? I was wondering what's the process we would go through to do that sort of analysis for ourselves.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Is that information recorded or not recorded, obviously, but reported anywhere, Mr. Payne?
Through your worship, the works and services portion, I would say, of the development does come to the district in the new process, because as mentioned, we would require that the professional engineer of record representing the developer would have to sign the valuation of all the assets that were built and given to the district. So that would include, that would represent the cost of building such assets. Other things like on-site costs, I would say no, which the majority of costs are going to be on-site costs. The building, for instance, there's a hint when we get the value from BC Assessment, but that's market value, not necessarily construction value. And of course, a developer wants to make a profit, so there should be a difference between those two. So it's not something that we proactively collect, and it may be proprietary, but it's not something we actively collect.
So if the last follow-up, if I may, is that if and when we do set up a finance audit committee, those are the sort of questions that I might want to drill down in, especially in the fact that it is potentially confidential information, and finding ways that we could do that to make sure that they're getting good value for money. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. We have a motion on the floor. Don't see any other hands popped up. Oh. Nope, we're still clear on the board. So I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, everyone, for the thoughtful discussion. Thank you very much, Ms. Bates-Emer, for joining us this evening. You can zip up and take off. Absolutely. That sounded bad. The zip up her portfolio binder that she has in front of her. Have a great evening. Moving on to item number 9 on the agenda, we are going to go to the items number 9.1, 9.2 are both subject to public input. So if anybody wishes, sorry, I'm on the wrong. Already done that one. So just allocation 9.2, allocation of accumulated surplus. Again, this is subject to public input. If anybody wishes to address us, I would encourage you to call into the 1855 number at this time and hit the *9 to raise your hand so we can call on you. Before I go, again, the same process, I'm going to call on Mr. Payne to provide an overview. I'm going to go to questions from council, I'll go to the public, and then we'll come back here for motions to move it forward. Mr. Payne, welcome back.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as the previous presentation commented on, the district produces a budgetary surplus or deficit depending on financial results. Deficits are typically, they're rare because the financial plan bylaw is usually constructed in a way such that it's flexible. And if staff are expecting a deficit, we're required to come to council and amend the financial plan bylaw. So a budgetary deficit is very rare. So normally there's a budgetary surplus at the end of the year. This year's budgetary surplus was $2.7 million. Those funds represent funding that can be allocated for various purposes by council. Historical practice prior to 2019 would be to allocate those surplus projects during the financial planning process. So council would articulate what things they wanted to spend money on and fund in the financial plan, and then the senior staff would take those funds and allocate it. Surpluses for the 2019, 2020, and now 2021 year have not yet been allocated. They've been accumulated in what we call the operating fund. You'll find that in note 7 of the financial plan. And the operating fund is essentially what I refer to as the accumulated surplus reserve. It's the accumulation of budget surpluses throughout the year. So it's recommended, however, that the surpluses be allocated to reserves or other purposes annually in public in a transparent way by council and by council's through council's direction. There's currently $17 million in the operating fund. Some of these balances that make up that operating fund were clearly intended for specific purposes, but there's some that are they haven't been. There's been no purpose really identified for them. Now, a good chart to follow along with what I'm saying here will first be the chart in the analysis section of the report, and I'll just go through that in higher level, and I'll demonstrate the balances that are in that reserve that are clearly intended for a specific purpose, that staff are recommending you retain that specific purpose, and then we'll come to the bottom line of things that staff are recommending you allocate. So within that $17 million, you've got $405,000 that was clearly intended for recreational capital, so staff are recommending that we put that in our capital works reserve for that purpose. Similarly, there's $121,000 for bike lanes that was clearly intended for that. So staff recommend you put that in our capital works reserve for precisely that purpose. There's $251,000 in a climate action reserve, which is part of that larger reserve. That represents the accumulation of our climate action revenue incentive program, which is now discontinued with the province. So those funds were set aside in a separate reserve for climate action. We recommend that you retain that balance for that purpose in the accumulated reserve fund. There's $800,000 in the major crimes reserve. The funding for this reserve comes from the police department annually, so we highly recommend that you retain that balance for that purpose. There's almost $6 million of budgetary surpluses from the sewer utility. So similar to our taxation, the sewer utility has seen surpluses over the year. They've accumulated to $1.6 million. Since that's funded by sewer utility revenues, we recommend that those surpluses be used for sewer utility purposes. So we're saying keep that in that reserve, used for sewer purposes. And we've identified what we think the best sewer purposes are. I'll explain that just after I talk about the next bit, which is the water utility. Similar to the sewer utility, we're seeing an accumulation of $3.5 billion in water utilities surplus. In discussing this with the leadership team, we recommend that those funds be used to accelerate our sewer and water capital replacement, which is a desire that's been indicated by council. Although our ongoing capital replacement needs an ongoing funding source, this would be a good kickstart to that program that we could use without waiting for our utility rates to catch up. And as you may recall, staff have been recommending that we increase our utility rates for infrastructure replacement, and council's been supporting that recommendation in the budget. So those ongoing operating funds are catching up to our ongoing replacement needs, but we're saying this $5 million here would be a good kickstart to those replacements, so we're recommending that it be retained for that purposes. So assuming, and I don't want to make any assumptions here because there's a lot of decisions that could be made here that don't necessarily align with what's presented in the report. But assuming that council agrees with those recommendations, that would leave $10.7 million, which is completely unallocated in accumulated budgetary surpluses. And we've broken that down into what we would recommend, subject, of course, to council decision-making. First of all, we recommend $2.5 million be used for council priority initiatives. The way we arrived at the amount is we simply looked at the council priority initiatives over the next 5 years in our financial plan. Those add up to roughly $2.5 million. So we're saying let's reserve that for that funding. We have been using the accumulated surplus reserve to fund council initiative projects already, so this would just sort of cement that. Then we're recommending $1 million for a financial and service level stability reserve. It's sort of a realization that came out of this last recession with the Parks, Rec, and Culture, and that's our vulnerability to recessions and the impacts it has on our revenue. So that such a reserve could be set aside for use during recessions such that we can continue to provide the same service levels even when the revenues aren't there. This time around, we had a COVID-19 restart grant. That generosity from the province may be extended, and the next time around, we don't really know. But having a financial stability reserve provides for that a stronger assurance moving forward. Similarly, the building and planning department is subject to significant volatility. This year, we're expecting some significantly large permit values, which would mean we will go over in revenues, and in turn need to hire more staffing to keep up with all the building permits. So in the cases where we have underspent in the building and planning department or received additional revenues, we can put those in the reserve and we can use it to offset future temporary staffing needs or other needs to keep up with that. Next, we are recommending $1 million in the capital reserves. $1 million be transferred to the Capital Works Reserve for active transportation and transportation safety improvements. Council will recall that you funded a options analysis for active transportation this year. The engineering department will come back with a number of options for creating or accelerating our active transportation program. Some of those options could exceed $1 million. There's no funding source identified for that. So when the options are presented before you, we don't have a funding source. So we are recommending that this could be a funding source for that. And then lastly, that would leave $6.2 million, and we're recommending that get transferred to our infrastructure renewal reserve, simply to support our ongoing needs for sustainable infrastructure replacement. So the chart at the back of the report is a good way to just view how staff recommended changes would impact our reserves. If you scroll to the attachment 1, it shows the current balances in the reserves that we're talking about today and how their staff recommendations would change that. So that's a good way just to see how those resolutions would change those balances and where they would go. Your Worship, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Payne, for such a fulsome report and piece here. Are there questions for members of council on this? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Payne, for this report. It would have been very nice to have it when we actually did the financial plan, because it would have saved a lot of time going back and forth with me. However, I'm very happy to see this recommendation come forward, because reserves are important to the financial health and stability for long-term planning, definitely to us, and something that we've been very short of in this community for a while. So that's great. One thing I would like comments on, perhaps from you, is your recommended or intent to set reserves at minimal or optimum levels, so that we are not in the future underfunded in a reserve or underutilizing the funds either, by just leaving them sit in those reserves for long periods of time when we actually do. Hopefully we will scale up the capital projects and there'll be a lot of demand for the capital projects. So I'm wondering if we could have comments on just what the intent is going forward.
Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the question. The answer to the question would really differ depending on the reserve that we're talking about. So for instance, our infrastructure renewal reserves, sometimes people ask, well, what's our optimal level? What should they be? And I would say, well, it's going to be directly proportional to how much you've consumed in those assets. If you're halfway through their life, you know, you want to peg it at half the cost of replacement. If you're 90% through your life, your reserve should be at 90% of that. If you're early, it should be early. And so depending on the life cycle of the assets, the reserves will be volatile, and that's to prevent volatility in your tax increases, right? But there are other reserves where setting a cap or a minimum is entirely appropriate. For instance, the major crimes reserve, you may want to peg it to an analysis of how often do we actually need to use a major crimes reserve? How often are we going to go over budget? And what's the average cost of that over that time? And we establish an annual transfer to the reserve that matches those expectations. So you would integrate that in there. The same thing can be said about a financial stability reserve. You don't want to have a financial stability reserve that just sits there in perpetuity, because then that would represent overtaxation. And you don't want it to be too low either, then you're not mitigating the risk, which is the purpose of it. One thing I didn't mention in my presentation, which would be helpful in this answer, is that I'm recommending that Council direct staff to prepare a surplus allocation policy, and some of those things can be taken in consideration in that policy.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you for that information. That's really useful, and we'll look forward to a policy coming forward in the future. Within the regulatory framework, we are allowed to, or staff is allowed to, transfer funds from one pool to another pool, as we did this past year for funding the fire truck, things like that. So what question 2 is, in the annual reporting on fund balances, will there be an inclusion of that internal borrowing and, you know, the transfers in, transfers out, and how it's repaid, and the statement, and where does that show up in financial statements?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Payne.
Your Worship, there's no requirement for the transfers to and from to show up in the financial statements. The financial statements will demonstrate the end of year balance and then the beginning of next year balance, but not the activity in between. However, we do provide that detail in our financial plan. So this year, we basically chose a threshold for activity and said, if any reserve is expecting more than this dollar value in movement, we're going to describe in the financial plan what that is. So we've done that. And so the question becomes, will we also then report last year's movements, not just planned movements, and that would be a good inclusion that I would support in the financial plan.
Thank you. Yeah, you mean the annual report in the financial plan? Great. Go ahead,
No,
Councillor Patterson.
I don't have any further questions, and you know, I think what staff has prepared to put into reserve funds makes sense, at least in this point in time. It's fairly new ground for us, so until we have some time and expenditures to change our opinions on that, I'm fine with them as they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I have Councillor Zelka and then Appleton.
Thank you so much, Chair. It's hard not to feel giddy with these numbers, and like, oh my goodness, how can we spend this money? But I am tempered in knowing that many of these balances may have something to do with the unencumbering of the gas tax proceeds. So that was done in the previous year. Let me just start there to confirm the fact that what $6.3 million got it's essentially distributed into these funds.
Mr. Payne.
Through your worship, no, this doesn't include those funds. Those funds were already transferred directly to our infrastructure renewal reserve per the council motion. So it's not included in any of the numbers today. It is included in the accumulated balance that you would see in the schedule in the infrastructure renewal reserve. But the question of where those funds have gone, that's not being discussed in this report.
You almost answered my question number 2 regarding the unallocated budgetary surplus aspect that includes the 6-point-something million, and also that $1 million item you suggested on capital works for active transportation and transportation safety improvements. So it sounds like none of those funds are actually allocated yet. Is this waiting for a future priorities process, or what will allocate those funds, $10.7 million approximately unallocated?
Mr. Payne?
Through your worship, if council adopts the resolution, the recommended resolutions in the report today, that would allocate them. But it doesn't have to be allocated today, and you know, there's lots of options for when that could occur.
Follow me up if I may. The recommended motions make no reference to the unallocated budgetary surplus items. So that's why I'm asking, how will those monies be allocated in some future time?
Mr. Payne, I think that really comes under the district. The first one, the 6.2 million of the operating fund, but I leave it to you to answer.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So, for instance, I'll use the same example, Councillor Zelka, that you used, and that was the active transportation, $1 million for active transportation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to find the resolution that relates to that one.
Yeah, I don't see a motion talking about active transportation at all.
Oh, right. So the active transportation allocation, staff are recommending that it be put into the capital works reserve specifically. So we took, so I apologize for this. We took all of the items that we recommended to be transferred to the capital works reserve and put them into one resolution. So if you take the top one, that $1.588 million, be transferred to the district's capital works reserve. That includes $1 million from active transportation. That includes $400,000 for Parks, Rec, and Culture. So I understand your confusion there. I apologize for that.
It's clear as mud and makes perfect sense now. I appreciate that. So then following up, continuing to dig deeper, if I may, we have this process going on for, let me get the words correctly, the pedestrian sidewalk master plan, which may lead to some interesting design work in this area, having specifically to do with active transportation and making our sidewalks even safer and easier to use, et cetera, et cetera. I presume some of these $1 million and other funds potentially could be used as part of that effort, or has it already been allocated to that effort?
Mr. Payne?
Through your worship, yes, if you allocated the $1 million to the capital works reserve for active transportation and transportation safety improvements, that could be used for the pedestrian master plan and the things that come out of that. And currently, that plan is being funded through the Capital Works Reserve in precisely the place that I'm suggesting you put the $1 million.
Perfect, because I do look forward to finding ways to make our sidewalks even safer, since I find as I run along the sidewalk, going up and down just drives me crazy, and it's such a tripping hazard. So I look forward to maybe a more European sidewalks that are flat. Thank you. Cheers.
It's an extra free bonus of getting a hill workout in on the sidewalks there, Councillor Zelka.
Yeah, but if I was doing skateboards, then that was a different kind of active transportation. I'm not doing skateboard.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. A couple of questions. Just one, there are a few components here, a few reserves essentially that constitute novel reserves, and I'm guessing that should this be approved, will the parameters for sort of the usage and expenditures for those reserves be brought back to council? Is sort of a summary or a policy statement about the intent and the usage of those reserves forthcoming?
Mr. Payne?
Thank you, through your worship. I would suggest that the only new reserve being created out of the recommended resolutions would be the financial and service level stability reserve. Honestly, I hadn't considered whether or not the parameters for that should come to council. However, it would be included in the budget surplus policy, so that would be a good place to define those parameters. Everything else, I believe, there's a council priority initiative reserve that as well would need parameters. Everything else is either established or in a larger bucket that's been established.
Hey, Councillor Alden.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Mr. Payne, for those comments, because that's actually the follow up is exactly about that, about the financial stability reserve, and I'm just curious as to whether or not it was contemplated to potentially be. I understand the intent of the reserve. I'm just curious as to another possible use of it being to cover or account for unanticipated service disruptions. So this is very inflationary and very revenue focused, but if there was an unanticipated disruption, say at a Parks, Rec and Culture facility that allowed it to not be open such that it was not generating revenue, would it also be applicable in that circumstance?
Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, I mean, that aligns with the intent that I'm putting forward to council, and I think the policy would specifically support or not support that, but it is aligned with the intent that I would embed in the first draft of that policy. Yeah.
Go ahead, Councillor Pat Appleton.
Thank you, Worship. And just one brief question on this, and I apologize, this delves into the realm of minutiae, but I notice the flagged amount for 121,000 for bike lanes. That was, as indicated, intended for bike lanes, and I'm just curious as to where that funding is. It seems like it's residual funding for potentially a previous project, and I don't mean to put staff on the spot, but I'm just kind of curious as to whether or not that's residual grant funding or something that we received for a previous project that we still have access to.
Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, that's precisely what it is, Councillor Appleton. It's a residual project funds that had been allocated for a project and then weren't needed. So there was a surplus from that project. I can't recall the exact project or what the initial funding source was, but.
Thank you. We're good. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Payne, for the report. I'm not going to delve into the minutiae of the budget. I was just looking at the financial impact statement, though, and I was very pleased about the capital reserve and the capital reserve funding. And I just wanted to commend you on a very good report. I was comparing reports like this to about 10 years ago when I was on council, my first term in Oak Bay, and these reports are just by far and away a sea change in terms of what we had received then. And that's no criticism at the time of anyone. It's just that we have, through your leadership, we have come to a much more sophisticated place in terms of how we build and express budgets and financial information to council. So I really appreciate it, and I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Patterson was making the joke in the room here that we didn't have any money 10 years ago, so it was hard to have good reports. Are there any other comments or questions? Oh, there's Councillor Braithwaite. I lost you there for a moment. Any other comments or questions? I don't see any members of the public that have indicated they wish to speak. I was going to look to staff to see if there's any that I have missed on my screen. Nope, we're good here. So we have the recommendations as laid out here. I'm happy to take the receipt and all of these recommendations together, or I can, if anybody wants to pull one out to discuss separately, I'm happy to handle it that way as well. So, is that a mover and a seconder? I have online Councillor Green and Braithwaite. Thank you. Any further discussion on the report that's put forward here? Don't see any. I think I'm going to call the question, but before I do, I'm just going to add my 2 cents into this. This is a really important first step for us, and I really appreciate the thought that's gone into how to sort of take what we had as a lump sum piece, give a logic to it, and end up here. And looking forward to that policy piece to help allow us to look at that sort of more long term. But I think just the response from this table goes to show how much thought went into this to allow for this to be handled in a reasonably straightforward fashion. So thank you for that work, Ms. McClendon and Mr. Payne, on this work. I know it's been a lot of time and effort to kind of bring it to something rational and reasonable. I don't see any other hands up, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you. That moves us on to section number 10 of our bylaws, or of our agenda tonight. And we have a few. These are not subject to public input. So I'm just going to go through to the first one. Ms. East, I believe we have on. Thank you. I believe we have Ms. East is to introduce the heritage alteration permit for 1265 Roslyn Road.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and through Your Worship to Council. I'll just introduce this is heritage alteration permit application for 1265 Roslyn, which is known as Robin Oak. It's a designated heritage home in Oak Bay. And the owner wishes to alter two interior features. And one is part of the fir flooring in the master bedroom, and the other one is part of the hexagonal black and white tile in the main bathroom. So the applicant, I believe, is there with their architect, and I think they could introduce and show you the details of this application best.
Sure. Why don't I welcome you up to the table? Do we have Mr. Kerr and Mr. Bennett? Is that correct? That's correct. Okay. Why don't you introduce yourselves and your connection to the application, and perhaps give us a quick overview of the application in front of us.
Thank you very much. My name is Graham Bennett. My wife and I own 1265 Roslyn. We bought it last September, and when we first started looking for a house in Oak Bay, we were looking for a bungalow, perhaps with some room to accommodate guests as well. And so when 1265 came on the market, it fit the bill really nicely. And it also had the added element of having heritage features. Our house in Calgary was built in 1913, so we have come to appreciate the features of an older home, and as well come to appreciate the responsibility of maintaining those features. Once we got into the house, we thought that we should make some changes to help us kind of age in place, if you will. And primarily what we're thinking is to move the laundry facilities out of the basement onto the main floor, and as well separate the public spaces from the private space, if you will, by creating a powder room bathroom where the existing entrance to the main floor bathroom is now, and creating an ensuite bathroom as well to go with the master bedroom. So we hired Jim to come up with better ideas than we would ever have. So he has, and the result of that is before you in the application.
I'm Jim Kerr, architect. I don't know if we have these slides available. I'm prepared to give a brief presentation, not quite as lengthy as the one at the Heritage Commission, but I'm not sure what your pleasure is in terms of, but the main points here are that the reason for the alteration permit is that we're, as Jacqueline mentioned, altering two of the protected interior features of the house. The exterior is not being affected at all. The changes are primarily internal. And those two, the two features are the existing fir floor, which is throughout the main floor except for the bathroom and the kitchen. There's some small alterations to the kitchen where the flooring is not currently protected, but the bedroom area and the primary bathroom is where the protected flooring is proposed to be altered. So I don't know if we can put that slideshow on or not.
Do we have an easy way? Do we have a copy of the presentation? Okay, perfect. Give us a second here to bring it up on screen, and we'll share it.
Thank you.
And this will make it available both to us in the room as well as the people watching online. So fingers crossed, because technology always seems to kind of laugh at our efforts to do this well. So there we go. We have the presentation up on screen. If you can just walk us through as you want us to change screens.
Thank you. This is the exterior, obviously, from the street, 1265 Roslyn Road, Robin Oak. So if we go ahead a couple of slides, next one, yes. So this is the main floor plan. The street runs up and down the screen to the left side. The backyard is on the right. The highlighted area at the northeast corner of the house is the current bedroom and bathroom area. The kitchen is on the lower right. And so the flooring is primarily, that's being affected here is in that sort of ochre colored highlighted area. Next slide. This is the original floor plan in that portion of the house, the northeast corner. There was a bathroom and 2 bedrooms. Next slide. And it was renovated in 1997, including within the bathroom new fixtures. The existing tile flooring, however, which is original, was retained at that time. Next slide. So this is the current plan. The bathroom accessed off the hallway, and there's actually a den and a bedroom on the right side. So the idea is, as Graham mentioned, to create a powder room and a slightly enlarged bathroom, which will effectively be an ensuite bathroom off a larger bedroom, which will combine the den and the bedroom on the right. Next slide. The flooring changes are highlighted on this slide. So the sort of yellow area is where the future powder room will be. And within that room, the existing bathroom tile will be retained and restored. There is some physical damage by way of a fault line through the middle of the room, which will be has to be attended to. So within that yellow area, the floor will be restored and the fissure corrected. The blue area is where the tile is proposed to be removed and replaced with a similar tile, not identical, but similar. The area on the right, which is in the orange, is the portion of fir floor which is existing, which needs to be removed to facilitate the enlarged bathroom. Next slide. So this is the sort of outcome, the final plan with the powder room, the ensuite, which also includes a small laundry closet, accessed off the bedroom, which has a new closet in the upper right. So all the existing fir flooring in the bedroom itself will be kept and restored, as well as it has already been throughout the house. The powder room will have the existing tile. The new ensuite will have the new tile. Next. This just shows some images of the existing fir. Some of these were patched in the 1997 renovations. Well, that will all be restored. Next. It's just a series of shots of the bathroom tile. Next. Some of the fixtures that were added in 1997, which will be removed. Looking up from the crawl space, the entire bathroom floor was placed on a concrete slab in 1911, so that will also be kept. Next. This shows the fissure which runs through the tile, which will require some substantial removal of a swath of tile, repairing the substrate, and then replacing the tile with, in the case of the powder room, with the existing tile salvaged from the bathroom portion. Next. 1997 renovations, there were some ruptures and some penetrations through the existing tile, which will be corrected. Next, final slide, I think. So this just shows the existing tile on the left, which is a 1-inch hexagonal tile, and the tile that's proposed, the new tile for the ensuite. So not the same, but similar and in keeping with the character of the house. So if any questions, happy to answer those.
Thank you very much to both of you for the presentation and the details. We have obviously the recommendation of the Heritage Commission in our report and pieces. So this is coming up to our table. Are there any questions of the applicants by members of council? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to the applicant, Mr. Bennett. Thank you very much for your attention and detail to this heritage alteration of the building. I see the Heritage Commission were on side with it. The stability of the building, because the fissure was caused by instability. Just a brief description of the work, any work that needs to be done to stabilize the dwelling.
Mr. Kerr.
Thank you for the question. So we think the fissure occurs parallel to one of the existing floor joists. The floor joists themselves appear to be in good shape. But you might have seen recall that slide with the 4 inches of concrete. So essentially the concrete was placed between the joists, and this fissure has occurred along one parallel to one of the joists. So for the joists will all be retained. There's a little bit of other structural work going on with the renovations, but none of that will be seen. So for the powder room, where the floor tile is being retained, a portion of the tile flanking the fissure will be removed, and the substrate, the concrete, will be ground down and leveled up, and then an anti-fracture membrane put down, and then salvage tile put back, so it will complete that restoration. And we feel that will be stable. In the bathroom portion, the tile will be removed and its grout bed, and then because it's bridging the gap between the bedroom and the bathroom, there needs to be removal of the fir flooring, as I mentioned earlier, removal of the tile, new plywood, which will go right across that joint where that fissure is, which will stabilize it, and then new tile placed on top. So we think it's a long-term solution for both those rooms.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of the applicants? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. I just wanted to express sincere thanks for your sensitivity in this renovation. It's beautiful, and I look forward to supporting the motion that's going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Well, go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Just to move the receipt of the staff report, Your Worship.
Second.
No discussion really. All those in favor of receipt? Opposed, not opposed? Continue.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I would move that Heritage Alteration Permit HAP 00022 be approved as presented, and that, et cetera, and that the planner provide a written record of council's decision to the property owners.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to take this opportunity as Heritage Commission liaison to echo some of the comments that have been made already. There was a clear effort made on behalf of the applicant and everybody involved here to be very sensitive with what's proposed. The Heritage members of the Heritage Commission were very supportive and spoke to one comment that was made, which I thought was very important, was to say, heritage alteration permits, facilitate the ongoing use of a heritage property, and they were talking about not that the property will not change, but how it changes, which I thought was an incisive statement. And so there's been definitely a lot of care taken here to adapt the building to its current desired use, but then also to consider its history. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I don't see other. Oh, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I also want to echo the comments of my colleagues. I think this is a great project. This house sits at the top of my street, in fact, so I've often walked by and admired this house, and I'm very happy to see that the new owners are taking such care and concern to make the renovations that will certainly improve the quality of life in the home and allow them to remain for some time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. I don't see any other discussion. I will echo the comments already made. Well done. Thank you for that work. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. The notification portion is pretty easy since you're sitting right here, but we'll. Thank you for coming in tonight and for your patience as you sat through the meeting. And have a great evening. And with that, we'll move on to the next number of items related to the financial plan bylaws. Have a great evening. First 10.2, we have the financial plan bylaw for adoption. If I get someone to read out the motion as it's laid out here.
Your Worship, I would recommend that the 2022-2026 financial plan bylaw number 4811-2022 be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Those numbers are all in the right order. We're all good. All right. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? And then item number 10.3, sorry.
Well, Your Worship, I would move that bylaw number 4812, tax rates bylaw, the tax rates bylaw number 4812, 2022 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you for that. Moving on to 10.4.
Your worship, moving that boulevard frontage tax rates bylaw number 4813, 2022 be adopted.
Moved and seconded for adoption. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We are moving back into areas of public input. If anybody wishes to address any either 11.1 or 11.2, I would encourage you to please call the number now and hit *9, as we're likely to move through these reasonably quickly. And I'll just look for any public input. Same process. I'm going to get a staff overview or introduction. We'll take questions. We'll take public input, and then we'll go to a motion. I believe this is Ms. Morden. Are you? Thank you. Ms. Morden, please introduce this item.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm pleased to introduce this item on behalf of Joanna Winter, our Chief Election Officer. It involves amendment bylaw number 4810, and that is an amendment to our elections and voting bylaw. So really just the first portion of the bylaw has to do with some housekeeping items. The second portion of the bylaw is the more substantive changes, and that has to do with mail ballot voting. So I think there are two kind of significant shifts to be aware of. The first is that since the last election in 2018, there was an amendment to the Local Government Act to remove the restrictions as to who could vote by mail ballot voting. The Local Government Act used to limit eligibility for mail ballot voting to persons who had physical limitations, illness, or injury. So those restrictions have been removed, and this amendment just brings our bylaw in line with that. So that will essentially provide for mail ballot voting by any eligible elector in the district who wishes to do so. So that's the first major change. The second has to do with authorizing the Chief Election Officer to establish time limits in relation to mail ballot voting. So that will buy us an extra couple of days to make those packages available to voters who wish to vote by mail ballot. I understand that several local governments through the UBCM had requested for that window to be widened. There is an amendment to the Local Government Act that would have to happen in order for us to widen that any further, and that has yet to happen. So we're hoping that conversation can be raised again after the election. In the meantime, this allows us an extra couple of days, and then moving forward, if there's a change to the Local Government Act, our bylaw is in good shape just to roll with whatever that change is, because it authorizes the Chief Election Officer to establish the time limits. So with that, I think that's everything I had to highlight, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morden. Are there questions for Ms. Morden? I have one quick question on that authorization of the Chief Election Officer to make those changes. I think the general intention of that would be to make it as long as possible. But of course, is there any protections there to stop it for someone who just happens to not want to do all the work and comes in and sort of has the authority without asking of shrinking that time frame? Is there any mechanism there to make sure that we're not making that so short as not workable, or changes the intent, which is to maximize the number of people possible to vote?
Your Worship, certainly that would be our intent. Are you talking about a member of the public who would come in and want to alter the timelines in any way, or?
No, my apologies.
No,
Just
that's okay.
in the delegation of the authority to change to match up with the provincial allowances. Obviously, the intention of that is to make it longer, but I'm just trying to. I didn't look at the wording closely enough, and I apologize. I should have asked this question ahead of time. But is there wording in there that prevents it from becoming too short without notification of council? Because obviously the intention here is to maximize the opportunity for voting, not to minimize it.
Yes, absolutely. That is our intention, is to maximize. And so that is what we will be seeking to do for the 2022 election. We'll also be looking to lengthen the period during which members of the public can express interest in receiving a mail ballot package. So they'll be able to register with us earlier. And we're very clear on that intent. So that's how we will be proceeding.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that clarity. Any other discussion or questions? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. It sounds like this will not be in place. The changes to the mail ballot will not be in place for the election coming up this fall. Is that am my assumption correct?
Ms. Morden.
Thank you, Your Worship. So all of the changes that are put in place as a result of this amending bylaw will be in place for this election. There is a broader conversation going on at the provincial level through which several local governments, I believe through the UBCM, have requested for the period during which mail ballot applications can be made available could be lengthened, but that would require an amendment to the Local Government Act. And so hopefully that conversation will be raised again following this election. It was not addressed during this term.
Fantastic. A follow-up. Wanted to, but the only sort of concern I've heard raised in this area is that for those folks who are away, who want to vote, say they're in Hawaii or some other place, they will still be able to vote with these amendments from a distance.
Ms. Morden?
Thank you, Your Worship. So yes, we will be working to make the process really clear well ahead of time how to request those packages so that people are clear ahead of their travel plans what they need to do to obtain those packages, to complete them, and to get them back to us on time.
And the last question is just confirming one last time that if someone is fully is not limited by physical limitation or illness or energy or being able to, for example, being able to walk, but they happen to be away for the duration of the election period, they can still vote via this mail process.
Ms. Morden?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we would make every effort to make that package available so we can look to mail, we can look to courier, we can look to have someone pick it up on their behalf. But certainly I think at that point, if they're going to be away for the entire period, we'd have to look at something that involved mail or courier at that point.
Yes, and I'm not referring to us delivering it to them. I'm referring to the elector not having a physical limitation and not having illness or injury, which I understand was part of the previous bylaw, and then we're removing those limitations on the mail ballot. Just that was my only quick question about clarification.
Ms. Morden?
Yes, thank you for that clarification. And yes, we would be removing those restrictions so any eligible voter could apply to vote by mail ballot.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, with 2 extra days to get in there. Any other discussions or questions? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
I would just move receipt of the staff report, Your Worship.
Moved and second for receipt. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I would move that elections and voting bylaw number 4284, 2005, amendment bylaw number 4810, 2022 be given first and second readings.
Moved and seconded. And I just want to point out, I don't see I don't see anybody from the public who's indicated they wish to speak, but I just want to make sure that I don't go there without checking. Nothing? No, I don't have anything either. Okay. So yes, we have a moved first and second reading, and I had a seconder. Is there any, this is the chance to make any suggested changes or corrections or comments. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was seconding, but I realized you said it's okay. It's okay. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Don't see any other questions or comments, so I'm happy to call the question on first and second reading. Yes, staff are okay with procedurally here. I saw a little sidebar. Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? And then third reading?
Move third reading, Your Worship.
Seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Thank you. We are moving on now to 3150 Tarn Place, and I believe we have Mr. Weber is here to again present this. This is an application that came to us previously. We sent it back for some requests for changes, and it's back in front of us with some of those changes. Mr. Weber, welcome back.
Yes, thank you, Worship, and good evening. The District of Oak Bay is in receipt of a combined upland study and design application and development permit application for the construction of a new single-family home on the property located at 3150 Tarn Place. As you mentioned, Council reviewed the application at the February 28th, 2022 regular council meeting and denied the application, citing concerns with the proposed encroachment of the development into the Shorelines Development Permit area. This motion was later rescinded by council and the application referred back to staff to address council's concerns. The applicant has since submitted revised plans which staff have reviewed and found to maintain conformance with district bylaws, the uplands design guidelines, and applicable policies within the official community plan, while also enhancing conformance with the Shorelines Development Permit Area guidelines. Specifically, the applicant has removed prior encroachments into the Shorelines Development Permit Area, including the pool and surrounding patio, stairs, and planters, and is proposing to maintain more natural topography within the Shorelines Development Permit Area and plant additional native plants. Sections of low retaining wall are still proposed to be located within the Shorelines Development Permit Area to accommodate a drop in grade around an existing rock outcropping. However, staff do not anticipate that this will negatively impact the environmental significance of the area. Based on the overall results of this review, staff recommend that the subject development applications be approved with conditions placed on the development permit which reflect the consulting qualified environmental professionals' recommended measures to mitigate negative impacts to the marine environment during construction, including within the Ecological Assessment and Shorelines Development Permit Area Report dated October 26, 2021. Staff are requesting council direction on this application, and the applicant, Brian Morris, is in attendance this evening along with myself to answer any questions council may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. And thank you to the applicant for bringing back these changes. Are there any questions of the applicant or staff at this time? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, Mayor, I have no questions, and I both appreciate the updated report, but also the owner's willingness to alter their plans. I think that's commendable. I would be quite happy to move both recommendations if that's suitable.
At this point, before we do that, it is subject to public input, so I want to make sure we give the opportunity for the public to provide that input prior to us getting to a motion. But thank you, Councillor Green. Go ahead, anything else, Councillor Green? Nope. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks so much, Mayor. I do have, I agree with Councillor Green. It's wonderful to see all the changes that were made. I think that the plan actually looks a little bit better than what it did before. My one question would be in regards to the retaining wall. I believe that some of the pictures, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the pictures show that there's currently a retaining wall already in the shoreline area, I believe. So I just wanted to double check with that.
Thank you. Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. And through you, there are some existing retaining walls, low retaining walls within the Shorelines Development Permit Area. But the applicant can potentially expand on this, but there are some new retaining walls being proposed just to better accommodate the changes in grade between the proposed pool and the lower elevation towards the shoreline.
Sure,
thank you.
I'll go to Mr.
Yeah,
Morris.
I know I'm fine with that. I just wanted to double check that there was some already there, and then we're just adding just a little bit, a small amount more. So thank you.
Thank you. If I could just get clarification, Mr. Weber, all of the additional ones are within the existing walls, correct? They're not any additional walls outside of the current shoreline walls that are there?
Sorry, could you just say that one more time?
Sure, and maybe it's a question better applied to Mr. Morris, but my understanding of looking at the plans is that all of the additional additions to the walls are at or within the existing walls. There's no expansion of the walls out further into the towards the shoreline.
Thank you. Yes, they're more so, I guess, where the existing walls are around the where the steepest changing in grades are.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Councillor Braithwaite? Nope. Okay. Any other questions of staff or the applicant? We're going to go to the public. Is there any members of the public who wish to address council on this item? I do not see any hands up or any indications that people wishes to speak. So we're just going to come back to this table. Look for, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the staff sort of trying to provide as much information as possible in the updated report. I wanted to ask about the geotech. I do note that the clarifications from the Fed 2028 meeting. It talks about how the main floor for the proposed house is at 20 foot, and I presume that's 20 feet above mean sea level. and the flood construction level was determined to be 14.59 feet, I presume again above sea level. Just wanted to ask whether there was any concern about the basement and about flooding. Thank you.
Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you, Worship, and through you. I think it may be best for the applicant to speak to this. I believe there's more information to be able to share on that topic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I believe that's Mr. Morris. Welcome, Mr. Morris.
Good evening. Yes, I believe we briefly touched on that in February. The flood construction level is indeed 14.59. And I believe in Oak Bay, they request that all mechanical equipment be located above that 14.59, and that we're still allowed to have floor space below that as long as it doesn't have any mechanical equipment or electrical.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Following up just briefly, as I say, thank you so much for the information. Of course, but with a longer timeline, this building may still be there long after the current owners are done with it. So it's always trying to make sure that we're building things well into the future, considering what may be happening or may not be happening with respect to sea level rise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other questions? I don't see any, so perhaps a motion would be in order. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I was just going to move receipt of the report.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Unopposed?
And then I'll move the staff recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. This is really more of a procedural question for staff, if I may, with respect to Uplands buildings in general. Since we have a sort of a staffing work that we're still doing within our building and planning department, the Uplands bylaw, and I'm referring to Uplands bylaw number 3545, the one that's up on our website. I'm giving staff a chance to look up the Uplands bylaw. In section 4, subsection number 1, the Director of Building and Planning must do certain things for every Uplands construction that is ongoing, including this one. I just wanted to confirm, since I've heard from some members in the Uplands area, just chatting over the weekend, it appears that there is some construction going on with no signage. Or if there is a signage, maybe it's fallen over. I'm not sure, but I just wanted to confirm that our building and planning department is fulfilling sections 4.1 with respect to the special signage that goes up for Uplands construction projects.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I might just, if staff can answer it right away, I'm happy to take it, but it's probably not likely. I think we can just take that as an offline question and come back with an answer.
That'd be
to
fine.
Council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, just go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And speaking in favor of the motion on the floor, obviously, I just wanted to take a moment to just say sort of how pleased I am with the way that this was resolved at a bunch of different levels. It worked very well. I was really pleased with Council's dialogue around the original presentation and recognizing the importance of the shoreline DPA areas and staff's analysis of what was required to meet the shoreline DPA requirements. I appreciate staff coming back after the fact on a procedural basis to rescind the original motion and allow the applicant to proceed with the redesign, and then definitely commend the applicant with the revised design and the thoughtfulness of the design. So I think even though the original design caused some pause and was definitely raised some issues and some flags, I think the resolution in conformance with both the upland siting and design guidelines and the shoreline DPA has been really satisfying. So I just want to thank all involved for resolving it in a way that really assures really good compliance with all relevant standards. So thank you to all.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. And I certainly share those feelings from my colleagues that have already spoken. I also want to say that this is a great model to resolve either conflicts or controversy. I think everybody made a commitment to work on this, and I really appreciate the time and effort of staff and the owner applicant, who also was willing to take a second look. So this is a model for a conflict resolution model that I certainly hope can be applied in other situations. It avoids, a lot of challenge otherwise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I don't see other hands up, so we're ready to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you to the applicants. I see the owners online as well. Good luck with your project. It's going to be spectacular when it's done, no doubt. We have up next item number 12 on the agenda, which is new business. There's been no notices of motions, so anything that people wish to raise under new business? Not seeing any, I'll go to item number 13, which is adjournment. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Thank you very much. We'll see you all another evening. I guess next Monday we have a planned scheduled committee of the whole meeting. Thank you.